Before you watch this shocking story about standing up against racism, about one man's courage to stop everything and call out hatred, smash that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell right now. This is a story about what real leadership looks like when it costs you something. Busts in silhouette, understanding the context. Racism in 1960s America. Before we tell you what happened at a concert in the 1960s, we need to understand the time period and what was happening in America. The 1960s was the era of the civil rights movement. It was a time when America was finally beginning to confront its racism. But it was also a time when racism was still deeply embedded in society. Many white Americans still believed that they were superior to black Americans. Many white Americans still made racist jokes. Many white Americans still used racist slurs without thinking twice. Racism was spoken aloud in public. Racist jokes were told at parties. Racist language was used casually. And for the most part, people didn't speak up about it. People didn't call it out. People accepted it as normal. But Dean Martin had already shown throughout his life that he was different. Dean Martin had shown that he understood that racism was wrong. And Dean Martin was about to show that he was willing to stand up against it, even in front of a large audience, even if it meant disrupting his own performance. The performance and the remark. Dean Martin was performing at a concert venue. The venue was packed. The audience was made up of people from different backgrounds. Dean was singing. He was performing beautifully. The audience was enjoying themselves. But then someone in the crowd made a racist remark. It was loud enough for people to hear. It was meant to be a joke, meant to get laughs. The comment was about black people. It was a slur. It was meant to demean and humiliate. Some people in the audience laughed. Some people stayed silent. But Dean Martin heard it. And Dean Martin's reaction was immediate. He stopped singing. He stopped the music. He stepped to the edge of the stage. And he confronted the person who had made the racist remark. Why this hook works. The audience immediately feels the tension. A performer stops his song because of a racist remark. What happens next? What does he say? How does the audience react? Everyone wants to know what Dean Martin does in response to racism spoken aloud during his performance. Dean Martin's values. We've already told you many stories about Dean Martin's values. We've told you about how he stood by Sammy Davis Jr. We've told you about how he challenged racism and stood up for people's dignity. But this story would be different. This story would be Dean Martin standing up to racism in front of a large audience. This story would be Dean Martin making a public statement about what he believed. Dean Martin was 60 years old at this point in his career. He was already legendary. He had nothing to prove. He had already achieved everything in entertainment. But Dean Martin still believed in standing up for what was right. Dean Martin still understood that racism was wrong. And Dean Martin was willing to use his platform to say so. The person who made the remark. The person who made the racist remark was someone in the audience. We don't know exactly who, but we know what he did. He made a racist comment. He meant to get laughs. He meant to entertain the people around him. He probably thought it was acceptable. He probably thought that in 1960s America, it was normal to make racist jokes in public. He probably thought that no one would care. But he had underestimated Dean Martin. The audience was mixed. Some people had laughed at the racist remark. Some people had stayed silent. Some people had been uncomfortable but hadn't said anything. Most of the audience was used to racist remarks. Most of them had heard them before. Most of them had accepted them as normal parts of public life. But they were about to learn something. They were about to see someone with power and influence decide to take a stand. Sammy Davis Jr. and the broader context. What made this moment particularly powerful was that Sammy Davis Jr. had been a big part of Dean Martin's life. Sammy Davis Jr. was black. Sammy Davis Jr. had faced racism constantly. Sammy Davis Jr. had been attacked by racist people. By standing up to racism during his performance, Dean Martin was honoring his friendship with Sammy Davis Jr. Dean Martin was showing that he took racism seriously. Dean Martin was showing that he understood the pain that racism caused. Why this section matters. Now the audience understands who Dean Martin is, someone with values. Now the audience understands what happened. Someone made a racist remark. Now the audience understands the stakes. Everyone is positioned for what happens next. Dean stops the music. The moment Dean Martin heard the racist remark, he raised his hand. The orchestra stopped. The music stopped. The entire venue went quiet. Dean Martin stepped to the edge of the stage. He looked out at the audience. He looked for the person who had made the comment. "Did everyone hear that?" Dean Martin asked. His voice was calm, but firm. Some people nodded. Some people looked uncomfortable. Some people looked confused about what was happening. "That comment that was just made," Dean Martin said. "That was racism. That's not acceptable. That's not something we do here. That's not something we accept." The uncomfortable truth. What Dean Martin had just done was force the audience to confront something that many of them had been avoiding. He had named racism. He had called it out in public. He had made it impossible to pretend it wasn't happening. For the people who had laughed at the racist remark, Dean Martin's words were like a slap in the face. They suddenly realized that their laughter had been noticed. They suddenly realized that their acceptance of racism had been called out. For the people who had been uncomfortable but silent, Dean Martin's words were validating. They felt grateful that someone finally said what they had been thinking. The message to the racist person. Dean Martin looked directly at the person who had made the comment. The person was trying to hide. The person was trying to blend back into the crowd. To whoever made that comment, Dean Martin said, "I want you to know that your racism isn't welcome here. Your hatred isn't welcome. Your words hurt people, and we're not going to accept it." The silence in the room for a moment. The venue was completely silent. No one knew what to do. No one knew how to react. But then something happened. People started to applaud. Not everyone, but many people. People who understood that Dean Martin had just done something important. People who were grateful that he had spoken up. The applause grew. The applause became powerful. The applause became a statement that Dean Martin had been right. The applause became agreement that racism was not acceptable. The message to the broader audience. What Dean Martin had just done sent a message to the entire audience. The message was, racism is not acceptable. Racism will not be tolerated. Racist remarks will be called out. Hatred will not be welcome. It was a powerful message. It was a message that many people needed to hear. The return to music. After this confrontation, Dean Martin had a choice. He could have ended the concert. He could have stormed off the stage. He could have let the incident dominate the rest of the evening. But Dean Martin did something different. He returned to his music. He started singing again. And this time, the song meant something different. The song was no longer just entertainment. The song was a statement. The song was saying, music is for everyone. Art is for everyone. Dignity is for everyone. The audience listened differently now. The audience understood that what they were witnessing was more than just a concert. They were witnessing a man of principle using his platform to stand up for what was right. The story spreads. After the concert, people talked about what had happened. In the days before social media, the story spread through phone calls and conversations. People heard about how Dean Martin had stopped his performance to confront racism. People heard about how he had made a racist person feel shame. People heard about how he had stood up for dignity and respect. The story became part of Dean Martin's legend. It became part of how people understood him. It reinforced what many people already knew, that Dean Martin was someone who stood for principles. Other entertainers take note. Other performers heard about what Dean Martin had done, and some of them started to think about their own responsibilities. If Dean Martin, one of the biggest stars in the world, could stop his performance to confront racism, maybe they could too. Maybe they had a responsibility to do the same thing. Over time, more entertainers started to take stands against racism. More entertainers started to use their platforms to challenge racist remarks and racist attitudes. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it was real. And it started with Dean Martin's willingness to stop his song and speak up. The broader cultural impact what Dean Martin had done was contribute to a cultural shift. He was one of many people, activists, performers, regular citizens, who were challenging racism and making it unacceptable. By standing up at that concert, by using his platform, by making racism uncomfortable, Dean Martin was helping to push American culture toward a place where racism was less acceptable. The person who made the remark. What happened to the person who made the racist remark? We don't know exactly, but we know that he was confronted. We know that his racism was called out in front of a large audience. We know that he experienced shame. That experience might have changed him. That experience might have made him think twice about making racist remarks in the future. Or it might not have. But we know that his racism was no longer acceptable in that space. What this story really teaches us. The story of Dean Martin stopping his song to confront a racist remark is ultimately a story about standing up for what's right. The lesson about speaking up, one of the most important lessons, is that we have to speak up when we hear racism. We can't stay silent. We can't pretend we didn't hear it. Dean Martin could have ignored the racist remark. He could have pretended he didn't hear it. He could have kept singing. But he didn't. He spoke up. This teaches us that silence is complicity. When we hear racism and we don't say anything, we're accepting it. We're allowing it to continue. We're telling the person making the remark that what they did was okay. The lesson about using your platform: Dean Martin had a platform. He had an audience. He had influence. He used that platform to stand against racism. This teaches us that when we have a platform, when we have influence, we have a responsibility to use it for good. We have a responsibility to stand against hatred and racism. The lesson about making racism uncomfortable. For many people in that audience, racism was normal. It was something they had heard their whole lives. It was something they had accepted as just the way things were. But Dean Martin made racism uncomfortable. He made it impossible to ignore. He made it impossible to pretend it wasn't wrong. This teaches us that we need to make racism uncomfortable. We need to challenge it. We need to make sure that people understand that racism is not acceptable. The lesson about respect for all people. At the heart of Dean Martin's stand was a simple principle. All people deserve respect. Black people deserve respect. People of all races and backgrounds deserve respect. The racist remark that was made in that audience was disrespectful. It was meant to demean people. Dean Martin understood this. And Dean Martin stood up to say, "Not in my space. Not while I'm performing. Respect is not negotiable." The lesson about courage: it took courage for Dean Martin to stop his song. He was risking the anger of the racist person who had made the remark. He was risking the anger of people who agreed with the racist remark. He was risking his comfort and potentially his safety. He was risking his performance. But he did it anyway, because the right thing to do was more important than his comfort. The question for you. This story asks each of us several questions. When you hear racism, do you speak up? Or do you stay silent? Do you have a platform? Do you have influence? Are you using it to stand against racism and hatred? Do you understand that racism hurts people? Do you understand that racist remarks cause pain? Are you willing to be uncomfortable? Are you willing to risk social consequences to stand up for what's right? The broader impact. How one man's stand changed the culture. What Dean Martin did at that concert didn't end racism, but it contributed to a culture shift. It contributed to the understanding that racism was not acceptable in public spaces. Over time, as more people stood up, as more performers used their platforms, as more ordinary people spoke up, the culture changed. Racism became less acceptable in public. Racist remarks became something people had to hide rather than something they could say openly. Dean Martin was one of many people who helped make this change happen. The legacy of speaking up today: when people speak up against racism, they're standing on the foundation that people like Dean Martin helped build. They're continuing a tradition of refusing to accept racism. They're continuing a tradition of using their voices to stand up for what's right. Fire the modern relevance. In 2025, racism still exists. Racist remarks are still made. Hatred is still expressed. But because of the work of people like Dean Martin, because of the cultural shifts that happened in the 1960s and beyond, racism is no longer as acceptable in public spaces. It's been driven underground to some extent. But that doesn't mean the work is done. That doesn't mean we can stop speaking up. That doesn't mean we can stop standing against racism and hatred. The challenge. In 2025, we need more people like Dean Martin. We need more people who are willing to stop what they're doing and speak up when they hear racism. We need more people who understand that staying silent is not an option. If you hear racism, speak up. If you have a platform, use it. If you can make a difference, do it. Don't stay silent. Don't accept racism as normal. Television final call to action. If this story inspired you, if it moved you, if it reminded you that speaking up against racism matters, then smash that like button right now. And subscribe. Turn on the notification bell. This channel is dedicated to stories about people standing up against hatred, about using your voice for good, about the power of refusing to accept racism. There are more incredible stories coming that will inspire you to speak up. In the comments below, tell us, have you ever spoken up when you heard a racist remark? Tell us about that moment. Tell us what happened. Tell us how it felt. Or maybe you've been grateful when someone else spoke up for you or your community. Tell us about that. Tell us how it made a difference. Share your stories. because the world needs to hear about people standing up against racism. The world needs to know that silence is not acceptable. The world needs to understand that one person speaking up can matter. If you've experienced racism, if you've heard racist remarks, know this. You don't have to accept it. You have the right to speak up. You have support. There are people like Dean Martin who understand that racism is wrong. Thank you for watching this powerful story about Dean Martin and his stand against racism. Thank you for understanding that speaking up matters. Thank you for believing that we can do better. Subscribe now and join a community of people who believe in standing up against racism, who believe in respect for all people, and who believe that one voice can make a difference. See you in our next video. And remember, don't stay silent. Speak up. Call out racism. Use your voice. Change the culture.